Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to round 7 of the 939 Corse Touring Car Championship for the second half of 2023. Can you believe just over a month to go now of this year already? We're here, though, in qualifying. Just under 10 minutes to go at Croft this evening, all the way up at the top of Yorkshire, right there at the not too far from the border with Scotland, really. So I imagine the weather in real life not quite matching the track conditions that we've got today. Probably more similar to what we have in somewhere like Las Vegas this week. But it's 26 degrees out there, ambient, and then 36 degrees on track. So it's nice and green is what we'd call the track. It's either green or optimum, really, for the drivers out here at Croft this evening. It's certainly optimum for Alan Matthews as he leads with a very comfortable 0.6 of a second to the car in front. We go on board there with Will Inglis, who appears to have had a little bit of an off there. That has slightly ruined this lap, as you can see, but he should be able to get underway. We're going down now on to the long back straight before you encounter, or just after you've encountered the hairpin, rather. I say the back straight, they're pretty much parallel with each other, so not too much at all to really separate them at all. You just got a couple of corners, yeah, you got Hawthorne, then chicane before you head straight back down. Another fast bit once again. The back end of the calendar really seems to be laden up with these very fast corners, very fast circuits indeed, rather, both in the single seater and the touring car running, which is certainly interesting in terms of getting the tyres into a good window, and is providing some great overtaking opportunities as well. Currently on the final couple of stints now, 6 minutes to go. It's Paul Millman who will be first man to come and start another quick lap. He is currently on a quicker lap. He's at 25.6 through the first sector, so not quite where he wants to be. You need to try and find another few tenths really in that first sector, at least wants a hope of closing up towards the likes of Barry Clayton, but currently is top of the midfield here so far in this qualifying session. A little bit lower numbers so far in qualifying. We never know, we might get a couple more before the races. Also, lower numbers can be a bit of a saving grace at such a tight and twisty classic British circuit, shall we call it. It's got all the tropes that you'd expect of a historic racing circuit in the middle of the UK. Some long straights, possibly from an airfield, followed by some very tight but very twisty corners indeed. It makes for some great racing. Paul Millman actually bailing out his qualifying session, deciding that's all he can really do with 5 minutes to go. He will be settling for P4 at the most. In fact, no, make that P6 as the drivers behind were able to improve on their times. They're on board at the moment with Alan Matthews, and we want to have a look, though, in just a minute at Will Inglis. He's coming towards the end of his warm-up lap and getting ready for a fast lap. Not to be outdone, though, we're on board with Alan Matthews at the moment. He's just gone purple through the first sector there. A small lock-up as he heads through the Tower Bend there, but is able to get back on the throttle. Didn't look like he lost too much time there, didn't wash out too wide, so should still go on for a fairly quick lap here. In fact, you can have a look at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. He's predicted a 23.8 at this moment in time, so is absolutely flying along, is well on track to be our first driver into the 23s, maybe make that the low 24s instead, which is what, of course, he's already done in this session. As it comes now towards the end of that rather long middle sector here before we have a very truncated final sector. It's another purple on this lap for Alan Matthews. I rather suspect, though, Will Inglis has taken the purple sector for Sector 1 this time round, as he's set a relatively decent lap by the looks of things so far. So we'll go on board with him in just a moment. Now, heading down the long start-finish straight, and it is, of course, still P1 for Alan Matthews, losing out towards the end of that lap. Actually lost a little bit of time through Sector 3, and that is Guy Swarbrick. Guy Swarbrick in the barrier there has made very gentle contact with the wall indeed. That shouldn't have affected the car too much. He should still be able to run quite comfortably at this late stage in qualifying. You don't really want to be jumping back into the pits and putting some new wings or bumpers on, because that is going to eat into the very little time that you have left in the session. We're going to go on board with Will Inglis then. He's currently running P2. Is actually looking like, has he just dived? No, he hasn't dived back into the pits. He's still continuing on, lost out through the first sector. What can he do through this middle sector here? It's not an improvement either. I'm starting to see late into the section, actually, drivers not being able to improve. We're about 13 laps in now. You were able to see most of them before commentary started. Yeah, it seems to be that the quickest part of the session is behind us now. Very interesting indeed. Let's see if anyone can break that trend. If is anyone, I suspect it could be the likes of Barry Clayton. Barry Clayton hasn't been able to get too many laps under his belt so far. He's only got, I say only, he's got 7 laps in comparison to his nearest competitors. They've got around 12, 13, and it's going to be another abandoned lap here for Barry Clayton. Still 3 minutes to go, and that will give you at least another lap, maybe 2 if you are lucky. Here to go in this qualifying session. Well, Willinglis clearly is picking up the ante here. He's found a 1/10 of a second through that first sector. A puff of smoke on lockup. We don't know what the setup is looking like here at Croft. You've got a couple of tight, twisty ones, followed by some medium speed corners, but of course those decently long straights. So I imagine the setup's a little bit more open for this race drivers, probably running slightly different setups. Let's see how these are going to compare. I suppose we I'll try that again. Won't really know until the racing here, but it'll be interesting to see if Willinglis is able to make time at the end of the lap in comparison to Alan Matthews. That's really what caused Alan Matthews a little bit of troubles in his last qualifying stint, was that end of the lap, whether it was the tyres giving up, whether the car was just no longer in a happy window, or whether, of course, in that tight twist stuff, whether it just wasn't the downforce on the car, or the car just didn't have the raw mechanical grip, really more so at that speed. Will Willinglis be able to respond, though? He's lost out a lot of time through that middle sector. Just the long start-finish straight to go as he comes across the line. It is not an improvement for him, unfortunately, in comparison to his rival. It's an 18, in fact, 0-0-0. It's an 18 absolutely flat for Willinglis through that last sector. That does not improve his time, unfortunately. He was, in fact, quite comfortably into the 25s there. Andrew Brammer, meanwhile, we haven't seen too much from him in the past few minutes, but he is improving rather nicely, it must be said. A 25.1 sees him just 3/10 behind Barry Clayton now. If he can keep this car in between the white lines there and keep the momentum going, he will be on for another lap here, but by the looks of things, he has just gone and violated some track limits there. He's taken the touring car line through some of the more twisty complexes, which is what we like to see, of course. The touring car line is always a more creative interpretation, shall we say, of the track limits. As Andrew Brammer is trying to push it with all his might, but I feel that the tyres are not entirely comfortable anymore. Maybe this is the end of his qualifying efforts here. I believe he can get another lap in. Yes, he can. He will just be able to squeeze one last lap in if he really tries now. Likewise, Willinglis as well. In fact, everyone on track at the moment is going to get one more quick attempt here at Croft. So this is really where it's going to count now. We're having a look at who is coming across the line next. It's going to be Willinglis who sets the next qualifying lap attempt here. It's in the 25 still for Willinglis. Let's go now and have a look at Paul Millman. He's just heading around the hairpin for the final corner of this lap. He's got plenty of understeers. Look at how much axle he's having to, or rather steering lock he's having to crank in order to get the car to make it around that very tight corner. You need a Monaco steering rack really for that last corner. He comes across the line, does Paul Millman, and doesn't improve either. Likewise for Andrew Brammer, likewise for Alan Matthews, and likewise for Barry Clayton. No improvements to be found all around there. As we see Barry Clayton, back end of his car actually looking like it wanted to rotate a little bit too much for his liking. He had to work quite hard to collect it there. So we have a look now at the final lap attempt. Barry Clayton is deciding that's all he can do in this session and is jumping into the pit here. Alan Matthews, meanwhile, has improved through that first sector, but we're looking now at Guy Swarbrick. He's lost some time through the first couple of sectors, but can he improve on his own to try and get towards Paul Millman just a few tenths up in front? As he comes across the line now, it won't be an improvement. It will, in fact, be an improvement. Apologies there. It's Guy Swarbrick now up into P5 in this session. Next, it's going to be Willinglis. Just 2 corners to go for Will now. That tight left-hander takes a slightly wider entry in comparison to Guy Swarbrick and Paul Millman that we saw before, as he stamps back onto that loud pedal. Will it be an improvement for Willinglis? No, it won't. It's a 24.7 in the end there. Now we have Paul Millman coming up next. An improvement through sector 2, but losing out through the first sector. It's going to be all the difference here. These last couple of corners now, and back onto that loud pedal has Andrew Brammer for company. He bails back into the pits. Nothing else that he can do. He decides in this session, do we see an improvement anywhere else? We do see an improvement for Guy Swarbrick in that final mini stint there, but for everyone else, that was all she wrote for qualifying. So it is Alan Matthews on pole position here. Willinglis P2, And then we have on the second row Barry Clayton, Andrew Brammer. Then on the third row, it's Guy Swarbrick and Paul Millman. We'll see you in just a few minutes for race 1 of this double-header weekend. And welcome back to the action, ladies and gentlemen. We are here on the grid, ready for race 1 of this doubleheader weekend here at Croft. A decently long run down towards that first corner. I'm not even going to try to pronounce T1 before you run through Hawthorne and the chicanes. Very important, especially given it's at the start of the lap. It's a very important sector to now because you've got that long straight heading down into that second sector. It is really important to get the launch absolutely nailed here and to keep the nose clean through those first couple of right-handers. Alan Matthews, Will Inglis on that front row. We've seen these two battle each other plenty of times. Barry Clayton could get in the mix as well. Andrew Brammer, always one to watch out for, always has brilliant racecraft. Likewise, Paul Millman and Guy Swarbrick, I'm sure, are going to have some great battles, though. It is 6 red lights on the gantry, and we are away for the first race of this evening. Some wheel spin off the line for Alan Matthews. Will Inglis does win out there as we head down towards the first corner, but importantly, Alan Matthews has the inside of the track. As we see Will Inglis being forced as wide as possible, and Andrew Brammer finding his way into a tyre wall. Paul Millman, by the looks of things, having his own. Oh no, that was actually an instant with Andrew Brammer. He was able to recover, though, was Paul Millman. Good catch. Unfortunately for Andrew Brammer, he was able to carry on, but with no front wing to speak of there. So that is going to be a not so fun car to drive at all. Might be quick down the straight, so we'll see. I imagine he'd prefer his rear wing to come off for that, but as we see Will Inglis heading now through the Tower Bend and back onto the throttle here. He's under pressure from Alan Matthews, but I get the feeling Alan Matthews is probably more focused on Barry Clayton, the car just behind him, as we head now before Barcroft here It is going to be between Barry Clayton and Alan Matthews first, this battle. Alan Matthews very late on the brakes indeed, gets a lock-up from the front axle before we head into the corner, and then a lock-up from the rear axle midway through that corner before we head now down into that final sector, that tight, I'll try it again, that tight, tricky and twisty final sector. No need to give myself tongue twisters so early on in the evening, but it is Alan Matthews still just about ahead of Barry Clayton now as we head onto that start-finish straight once again. Guy Strawberry getting a good getaway in this race as we head down towards turn 1 once again. Could be under pressure in a moment's time from Paul Millman. It'll be interesting to see what the speed traps will be looking like in a few moments once we're settled into the race a little bit more. But a good, strong first lap for most people in this race. It's a shame for that incident between between Paul Millman and Andrew Brammer there. It's not something we usually see from Andrew Brammer. Rather, not to say it was his fault, we don't usually see him get involved in those sorts of incidents, and now he's really going to have to put that strong racecraft to good use here. He's only got 5 cars up in front of him, and he needs to try and get ahead of some of them, because we know if he usually keeps a nose clean, he can often find himself on the podium. I have a feeling that might be off the cards potentially this evening, but we'll see what he can do as we head now down towards that middle sector, through that middle sector once again, rather. It is still Wood Inglis who leads by a strong 1.1 seconds now. A big lock up there for Barry Clayton and for Guy Strawberry as well, and for Paul Millman as we head into Barcroft. I get the feeling that all of that locking up is owing to, obviously these are front-wheel drive touring cars. That front is so loaded at what is a decently high-speed part of the track as well. It's a slight bit of right turn as you are under braking. There's so much energy being put through the front axle that the rear axle is completely unloaded, so there's much less grip there. You're going to stamp on the brakes and cause that locking. It's something that the drivers are going to want to try and take control of so that they don't completely ruin their rear tyres later on into the race, because that locking up problem will get worse. Barry Clayton had a great run out of the final corner there and has been able to put the pressure on Alan Matthews and force him into his own error, force him wide at turn 1 and off the track into P3 now for Alan Matthews. That is not what we want so early on. Yes, it just looked like Barry Clayton, I thought, was going to be too far back to make anything stick there, but he was able to. So excellent racing from Barry Clayton. They didn't even really need to get in too close proximity in the end, as we have more locking up. It's one of those evenings, I think, we often have those races where locking up is the theme of the evening. You just see these clouds of smoke no matter where you look across the circuit. This is certainly going to be one of those. These tyres are going to be pushed to their maximum, I think, this weekend, because there are some higher energy parts of the track. The front tyres probably getting a decent workout as well, actually. And there we have a big old lockup for both Alan Matthews and Barry Clayton there as well. This could be a potential, although I'd be surprised, tactic from the driver to try and get some more energy into the tyres all round. And you never know, they also, with the front wheel drive nature of these cars, do appreciate a little bit of oversteer, potentially through some of the bends, to try and get that car rotated in a little bit more eagerly. That could be what they're going for. It's a slightly dramatic way of doing it, and it can of course have some pretty disastrous consequences if it goes wrong, a big lockup like that. All we have to do is ask the likes of Guy Strawberry and Andy Craker, who were behind me for a few moments as I kept binning it in Sundays. We had a bit of a Sunday fun race at the Las Vegas circuit, and you'll hear more about that in the next Alpha Romeo driver issue, not the one that is currently being sent out to, the one after that, so it'll be later on this year. Or potentially, in fact, no, it'll be next year. But we had a great evening at the Las Vegas Grand Prix circuit in Giulia Zagato GT3s. Fantastic looking cars, by the way. And I was, I think it was turn 12, whatever the corner right before the big, long, massive straight, which of course we're visiting next week in the single-seaters as well, where I just kept locking the rear up on entry, and I was catching it most of the time. But it was... I was certainly making matters more difficult for myself, and we're seeing that again. Perfect example. Thank you, Barry Clayton. Just about keeping the car, I was about to say on track. He certainly kept it on track more than Alan Matthews, who did go for a bit of rallycross there, and is luckily for his sake able to continue on. Barry Clayton there with it's the rear right wheel that is taking most of the abuse. Of course, this is a clockwise circuit, so imagine the temperatures on that one probably looking a little bit more healthy, shall we say, than the rear left. So far into the race. Still only 5 minutes into this race so far, so the drivers are going to want to make sure that they look after the tyres as best they can all this battling and kind of skirmishing going on between Barry Clayton and Alan Matthews has allowed Willingliss to build up a bit more of a gap, as we see a bit of oversteer creeping in on the lockup there for Will, and he was able to keep control of that luckily, but he now leads by about 3.5 seconds. Meanwhile, there's only half a second separating Alan Matthews and Barry Clayton, and that is a very close part of the circuit. The Jim Clark S's, apologies, not quite at the Jim. Oh no, we are at the. No, we're not at the Jim Clark S's. I promise I know Croft. It doesn't really matter though. As we're on board with Alan Matthews bouncing over the curbs there. As we head now through the Jim Clark S's. There we go. See, I know where I'm going, honest. And towards the end of the lap, Alan Matthews right on the rear wing of Barry Clayton. Backs off a little bit through the final couple of fast corners on the track as Barry Clayton locks up once again. And I get the feeling Alan Matthews is just waiting for his moment to pounce, but he's being very clever about it. He's thinking he doesn't want to push too early on, because there could be a bit of a plane crash between these two cars here. It's a very high-speed circuit, this, of course. As we head now through Complex once again, and then onto that start-finish straight. Who is going to get that run? This run is so important because it really makes all the difference all the way up towards the Tower Bend. So he does have the benefit of a very slight bit of slipstream, does Alan Matthews, but I suspect also has the faster car ever so slightly in a straight line here because he's gaining, just wasn't able to make anything stick from that far back under braking. What we're seeing here is that Barry Clayton is really pushing it with all of his might, and it's such a tight circuit. What that does is it forces you to go over the curbs, and the curbs are upsetting the car immensely. And what this is allowing is it's allowing Alan Matthews to be all over him, because Barry Clayton is spending a little bit too much time just trying to catch the car as Barry squeezes Alan as wide as possible there, pretty much off the track, but Alan Matthews just about keeps on it, and there's contact between the two. I don't know if Barry Clayton was able to see him there as he tried to cut across the rest of the track. I don't know if he was in his blind spot there, or there just wasn't enough room for two cars to go. It was to be if they moved over to the right a little bit more, but that wasn't the case, unfortunately, and now it is Barry Clayton facing the wrong direction, and unfortunately for Barry, the entire field was quite close together, so that means he's dropped all the way down to P6 now. This gives us quite an interesting prospect here, because it's now Alan Matthews up with an 8-second margin down to P1, of course, but only about 1.2 seconds down to Guy Swarbrick, who's now running in P3. It's been a long time, actually, since we've seen Guy Swarbrick run with a shout at grabbing a podium here, so this will be a really nice race for him if he is able to do so. Let's hope he does as we get back onto that start-finish straight again. All we need to do is keep up with Alan Matthews, that car up in front. That could be a really good reference for him, actually, as we head down that start-finish straight now. He can see exactly what Alan Matthews is doing and try and replicate some of his braking points, try and replicate some of his lines through some of the corners, and just try and keep the nose clean and try and put a decent gap between him and Paul Millman. But I get the feeling that Paul Millman and Andrew Rama are going to try to challenge later on into this race. Of course, you can't rule out less than half distance. Barry Clayton is just about 2 seconds off this pack here, this mid-pack. So at any point, I suspect, given the pace that Barry Clayton has demonstrated so far through the season, we could see Barry Clayton try to work his way up and surge back towards that podium. This has all of a sudden, with that one small incident between Alan Matthews and, I say small, that one incident between Barry Clayton and Alan Matthews has turned into a bit of a more mysterious race, really. It's turned it on its head. We don't know what's going to happen here. I can tell you, Guy Swarbrick trying to take a wider line under braking there, actually goes off the track. That upsets the car. He locks up, is able to keep the nose clean, but only just about keeps the car pointing in the right direction, so he wants to make sure he doesn't do that too often, otherwise he'll be facing the wrong direction, and that would be a shame here, as we have a great move by Andrew Brammer up the inside there. Saw his opportunity, seized upon it, but Paul Millman fighting back up the inside, bounces over the curbs, just about gets the car slowed down. Fantastic move from Paul Millman, takes the tight inside line there, and Andrew Brammer's rather caught out there. He's boxed in by Paul Millman on the exit, and of course taking that wider line. Barry Clayton says, thank you very much, I'll take the inside line as well. You're boxed in, I've got a clean run down the start-finish straight. Wasn't able to capitalise on it in the end. And there's contact, big contact between Paul Millman and Andrew Brammer. I'm not sure if Paul Millman saw him. I don't think Paul Millman saw where he was. And just how close he was. Unfortunately, that is now Andrew Brammer in the gravel on the outside of the circuit once again in this race. And down in P6, a disaster for Andrew Brammer then. Paul Millman as well loses time, is still in P5 though. Hasn't been the cleanest race for some so far. Race 1 that has promoted Barry Clayton up to P4, so in the end he's only lost a position, so I'm sure it swings and roundabouts really for Barry Clayton at this point. And it's less so for Guy Swarbrick, because Barry Clayton is certainly no slow driver and has got a little bit more pace underneath him at this point in time in comparison to Guy Swarbrick, so will be hunting him down at some point, I suspect. Damage dependent, of course. Meanwhile, all of this is happening. Will Inglis is casually setting purple sectors. He's currently predicted, as you can see there, a high 24, low 25 based on the mini sector. It's going to be a low 24, I suspect, and it will be a good effort as well. First lap into the 24s so far this race. That is a complete lie. That actually goes to Barry Clayton, who has, of course, been surging his way towards Guy Swarbrick. But Will Inglis leading with some decent pace, so he doesn't need to push too hard. We've seen it in the past. We saw it at Thruxton. We saw it at some other tracks as well. And just pushing a little bit too hard from a really strong point in the race can often mean you end up facing the wrong direction and off the podium. And there is little room for error here at Croft. So hopefully Will Inglis able to keep the nose clean and bring it home for some good championship points. Speaking of championship points, let's have a look at how the championship is faring after round 6. Last time out at Knock Hill. Of course, Knock Hill always providing plenty of action in the championship standings as well. As it stands, Alan Matthews building a strong lead now to Matt Daly. Unfortunately, Matt Daly not being here, you have to say the championship looking like it goes towards Alan Matthews at this point. 202 points to his name, and Matt Daly 169 in P2. Will Inglis, meanwhile, in P3 with 146, so he can try and close up a little bit towards Matt Daly at this point. I have a feeling, in fact, no, it is. Will Inglis' aim in this championship will be to take P2 away from Matt Daly. Still a very impressive feat if he is able to do that. Barry Clayton, meanwhile, running in P4 in this race, P4 in the championship as well. Certainly had pace at some points, has Barry Clayton. It's just unfortunately for him, some race weekends haven't quite come together. Likewise, as we see him here now heading on to that start-finish straight, fighting Guy Swarbrick. I don't think Guy Swarbrick might fight it all that much. We never know. Let's see as we head now down into turn 1. Barry Clayton benefiting a little bit from that slipstream. Let's see now as we head into that first corner. Guy Swarbrick actually bouncing over that curb and up onto 2 wheels, which is something we like to see, and certainly adds a little bit of drama on stream. As we see, yeah, Barry Clayton in 4th with 99 points to his name. We have Jack Hodson P5. Andrew Brammer with 82 points. Jack Hodson not here this evening. Andrew Brammer should take some decent points, even though he is running in P6, of course. Rosie Oliver P7. Paul Millman P8. Likewise, he will overtake Rosie Oliver at this stage in the championship. Then we have Andy Craker, who I had a fantastic evenings racing with on Sunday. Then we have Paul Brady, Rob Whitney, Guy Swarbrick, who should take away some decent points from this weekend as well. And then Steve Knight, Anthony Gray. This is actually... This slightly lower attendance race for the touring cars has actually really turned the championship on its head. The numbers have been really strong so far this season for the touring car running. It's been really consistent, and that has meant that the likes of Guy Swarbrick, Rob Whitney, and let's say Andy Craker as well, maybe Steve Knight, for example, haven't been able to pick up all that many points at certain points, as Barry Clayton forced off there a little bit. Not sure what went on there, but Barry Clayton ends up in the grass, is able to get back on track, though, very easily indeed. Yeah, what this has meant all of a sudden is that when you've only got 6 cars on track, there's all of a sudden some really good points on offer for some of the guys who might not otherwise score points at some weekends. So it's brought them straight back into contention, into their championship battles. It'll be very interesting at the end of the reverse grid race later on this evening to see how that changes things for the final round in a fortnight's time. Can you believe already the final round of the championship coming up? I certainly can't. It has absolutely flown by. Has this year's running overall, both H1 and H2 in both championships, heading into 2024 in the not-too-distant future. And speaking of the not-too-distant future, a potential overtake for Barry Clayton in the not-too-distant future, I think. He's certainly got extra pace. It's one thing to have a slight pace advantage, though. You need a little bit more in order to get past. And unfortunately, Croft, a very narrow circuit, and Guy Swarbrick being quite strong on the defence here, not able to find a way past him is Barry Clayton just yet. This is a great drive, a great podium defence from Guy Swarbrick, something that we've seen before, actually. It's not too often. I'm sure he won't mind me saying this. Maybe, in fact, of course, we saw this week, actually, Guy Swarbrick, and it'll be featured in Alfa Romeo Driver at some point, I suspect. Guy Swarbrick was enjoying some racing machinery, some 4Cs, and I believe possibly a 2-litre, the 4C swapped for a 4-metre as well, as I'm sure you all know. And, oh dear, that's big contact there. I think Barry Clayton just wasn't quite anticipating where the nose of his car was, and does wait to allow Guy Swarbrick to get underway once again. That has compromised his race big time though, and it's now Paul Millman up into P4. Barry Clayton drops down to P5. Gives a little bit of breathing room to Guy Swarbrick. So that incident, while it certainly doesn't look helpful to his race, it was a very odd incident. Now, very slow speed. You wouldn't quite expect it to happen, that spin around, but it did, and it's actually, perhaps somewhat surprisingly, helped Guy Swarbrick's race a little bit. Now he's got a bit of a buffer zone. Barry Clayton is now separated between Guy Swarbrick by Paul Millman, and it's about a second and a half down to Paul Millman as well. So this could actually have helped secure the podium for Guy Swarbrick just that little bit more. As I was saying, yeah, he's enjoyed some racing machinery this week, so maybe he's picked up a trick or two from the Alpha Workshop guys. But the last time I saw Guy Swarbrick really fighting for a podium was at Monaco. It's got to be 2 years ago now, in the old Tartuses, the old 1.4 powered Tartuses, and they seem like a distant memory now, and so does that weekend at Monaco. But he put up a very strong drive indeed and came home with that podium. I'm sure there's been a couple more in between, but that's one that sticks out in my memory. So it'd be nice to see Guy pick up another one here. This race, it really benefited him quite immensely actually in the championship standings. He gained a few positions from this, as Barry Clayton is trying to gain a position now as we head towards the end of the lap. Once again, has a look around the outside of Paul Millman. No, it's going to be inside instead, but it's a nice defensive line from Paul Millman there. Paul Millman's actually really strong on the defensive lines at some certain points. He seems to be good on the defense now. As we have a look there, Barry Clayton gets the nose out in front, has a bit of better straight line pace there, has the inside line there, forces Paul Millman wide. Fantastic move, nice clean racing from Barry Clayton there. Andrew Brammer just behind as well, takes the curb. The rear axle of the Giulietta bouncing about all over the shop, which is a bit of a trait really. It looks fabulous doing it as well. As we get back onto the back straight now, as we have, is that a bit of a battle between, it is a bit of a battle between Willigliss, it's not a bit of a battle between Willigliss and Alan Matthews rather, to apologise there. I think that every now and again, it seems to be, about 20 minutes into the races, no matter what track we're at, the transponder just kind of has a small wobble. Not entirely sure why, it's probably something on my end, but I think it just likes to add a bit of jeopardy, or maybe try and give me a half to sack or something, where it just kind of makes me think there's all of a sudden there's an immense battle for the lead, or someone who was P8 is all of a sudden P1 by some magical teleportation. It of course, is very rarely the case, but sometimes it can be. Go back on board with Guy Swarbrick then. Must be said, he seems to be in control of this. Oh, commentator's curse. My commentator's curse recently has been absolutely appalling. This race so far, not too bad. But having just said Guy Swarbrick seems to be in control of this race, I am very sorry, Guy, for anything that happened. It was I ruined Matt Daly's race in Brazil last time out, and Alex Smith's. I commended Alex Smith on having a very clean race, putting together a really strong weekend, and literally the corner afterwards, facing the wrong direction and completely off. I'm very sorry for that one. Let's have a look. It's Guy Swarbrick now. He is 26.8 on that last lap, so not the quickest car out there. In fact, the second slowest car out there, that goes to Paul Millman, currently slowest car on the track. It's under pressure from Barry Clayton, who's in the high 25s. Guy Swarbrick in the high 26s. Best lap for Guy, a low 26, and the best lap for Barry Clayton, a low 24. So if you were a betting man, you would say Barry Clayton is looking like the favourite here, but it must be said, Guy Swarbrick, hats off to you, sir. Put up a very strong defensive drive here so far. A big lock-up on the rear end, though. Has that cost him a little bit too much speed? The cars behind, Paul Millman and Andrew Brammer, replicating that, though, as we get back towards the end of the lap once again. It's a 24.2 on the last lap for Alan Matthews. He's really pushing on now, keeping that gap between him and Willigliss fairly consistent, if not a little bit shorter than it was a moment ago. And there we see, is Barry Clayton going to try it around the outside? I don't think he can. I don't think we've seen that so far this evening, and I don't think it will work, and that is the reason why, as we get back onto that start-finish straight now, who got the quicker run out of that final corner? It seems to be pretty even Stevens as we run it into that first corner once again. Who's going to be later on the brakes then? As again, pretty even between these two drivers, it must be said. This is a fantastic drive from the black and white Giulietta here, under pressure from that screaming bright green or yellow, based on who you ask. Giulietta of Barry Clayton now as we head down towards that second sector once again. Barry Clayton is going to dart to the other side of the circuit. He tries to find a way past. Has this been the overtake that he's been looking for so long in this race? Now we head into the Tower Bend, and it is under braking round the outside almost. Barry Clayton into P3. My commiserations really to Guy Schwarbeck. He was putting up an almighty fight, just unfortunately the pace at some point or another you had to ask the question. It was a question of when, not if, really. And it is Barry Clayton up into P3 now. Meanwhile, only 2.5 seconds separating Alan Matthews and Will Inglis. They're now occupying the same part of the track, the same shot on camera. Let's see what happens now in the final few laps of this race. 15 laps in, of course. And just a couple more to go. Meanwhile, the back end of the field, it's Paul Millman and Andrew Brammer as we head into the final part of the lap. Just 2 corners to go for these guys. There are Barry Clayton and Guy Swarbrick as well. Still plenty of potential action to come from those two. Just yet, Andrew Brammer goes a little bit wide on the exit of the corner. That might cost him a little bit of speed as he dips onto that grass, unless the diff is working particularly hard, or he's using a very aggressive diff. That could also be the case, although I imagine the twisty stuff that could cost you. As we head now through that second sector, as over the curbs there, the back end wanting to step out on Paul Millman's car. He was able to grip up the front end and keep it in line just about before he ended up in a barrier there. So get back on to the back straight now with Andrew Brammer and Paul Millman. Headlights on for Andrew Brammer. They've dart up the inside there, late on the brakes. Strong move there, but goes too deep into the corner. Paul Millman actually finds that quick line, taking a more sort of V-shaped approach to the corner, has allowed him to get the better exit. Andrew Brammer, I must say, of course, don't forget, early on in that race, in the tyre wall, so has no front wing at all. So a very strong effort from Andrew Brammer indeed here. And now finds himself behind Paul Millman, unfortunately for him. But Paul Millman, very strong defence there, as is this an overtake for Alan Matthews. No, I don't believe it is just yet. No, it is not. Panic over if you are Will Inglis, of course. As we head now onto that back straight once again. Barry Clayton, meanwhile, seems to have dispatched somewhat of Guy Swarbrick. Just 1.5 minutes to go in this session. You wouldn't believe there was only 6 cars on track this race, because the action has been non-stop. So if you are thinking that you'd like to get involved in this, by all means, do join the AROC Racing League's pages on Facebook, or speak to Guy, speak to myself, and get involved, because this is some fantastic racing action now as we head on to the back straight once again. Will Inglis still just about leading in this race, in fact extending that lead as well. Has he been able to look after the tyres well enough? Tyres are always a consideration here in the Giulietta, managing the temperatures, managing the grip levels, managing that wear, and it seems to be that Croft has been a little bit more generous than some circuits, it seems, in terms of keeping the tyres in a happy window, because the drivers haven't looked like they needed to slow down all that much. We might have lost a second compared to our peak pace, but other than that, they seem to be fairly happy, as I am sure Paul Millman not feeling entirely happy right now, although I'm sure revelling in the battle, because the battle continues on between him and Andrew Brammer as we head into the final part of the lap once again now. It's just 1/10 of a second separating Paul Millman and Andrew Brammer. And we head into that final corner once again. On to the throttle once more. Andrew Brammer is right on the rear wing of Paul Millman's car, though. Nowhere for him to go, though, and actually losing a little bit of speed down the start-finish straight. The timer hits 0, and we now have not long at all to go in this race. Four seconds now, that gap between Will Inglis and Alan Matthews. Meanwhile, the gap between Paul Millman and Andrew Brammer is very close indeed. Having a look up the inside, it is Paul Millman who's going to try and get the position back in the same manner that he did a couple of laps ago, though. This time Andrew Rama was ready for it and maintains that P5, that hard-fought for P5. The question we ask ourselves, though, is for how long. These two are so close in terms of pace. They have really been a strong match for each other as we do start the final lap of this race. Now, at some point, we'll go on board with Will Inglis, but all of the action is here at the back end of the field between Andrew Rama and Paul Millman. This is a battle for the ages, and it's a battle for P5. Taking the inside line there, Paul Millman takes a much quicker line, and there's contact again. I don't think Paul Millman quite saw or quite anticipated where Andrew Rama was going to be. There was nowhere really for Andrew Rama to go from that position. He was already under braking on the inside line there. Nothing else that he really could do, and unfortunately for Paul Millman, that is it for that battle. That brings that battle to a close now. Andrew Rama does win out in the end. But speaking of winning out, we're going to go on board with the Will Inglis now as we celebrate him winning out here in race 1. It was really all done early on once he was able to get that relatively clean getaway and was able to secure the position on lap 1. He's just had a relatively quiet and comfortable race. Remember when I said I hope we see Matt Daly because that might continue on that championship fight? Well, here we are. Here's Matt Daly. He, of course, won't be classified for this race, but could be on for scoring some points in race 2 coming up in just a few moments' time. So that certainly adds a little bit of spice to the mix. So thank you, Matt, for that one there. As we see, Will Inglis now jumps back onto the throttle for one final time, flashing the lights in celebration, comes home to take the race 1 victory. Congratulations, Will, and it will be Alan Matthews who comes home P2 there. A strong drive from both in the top 2. It was too little too late, unfortunately, for Alan, but a strong pace to match Will Inglis in the end. Barry Clayton, at one point in P6, has been able to work his way through the field and will be coming home with a P3 as he gets back onto that start-finish straight, which I'm sure he's very happy with indeed. In the end, not too much of it. In fact, not a net loss of positions there. If you look at it on the scorecard, you wouldn't think too much had happened, but that's certainly not the case. Meanwhile, it's going to be Guy Swarbrick who comes home P4. At one point, a podium certainly looked on the cards. Is this Andrew Rama out of fuel? It's Andrew Rama out of fuel. There's contact between Andrew Rama and Paul Millman. Not sure what that was for, but I can tell you that now means Paul Millman comes home P5. After all of that battling, Andrew Rama runs out of fuel. I think... Has he run out of fuel? The car now seems to be absolutely fine. Not sure what happened there with Andrew Rama. Either way, we'll become going P6 in the end. That I'm fairly confused with that one, to be honest. I'm not sure what's happened. I might try and find out in the interval before the reverse grid race, because that I'm very confused indeed. Either way, Will Inglis comes out on top in the reverse grid race. So we'll join you in just a few minutes' time for race 2 for some more action here at Croft. And a welcome back to the action, ladies and gentlemen. We are here on the grid, ready for race 2, the reverse grid race. Let's have a look at how that lineup is forming. It is Paul Millman and Andrew Brammer, this time on the front row, battling it out, of course, at the back end of the field. It's going to be for the top end, at least for the start of the race. Then we have Guy Swarbrick and Barry Clayton on the second row, and then Alan Matthews, Will Inglis on the third row, and all on his lonesome at the back there. Look at Matt Daly in shame corner for not participating in qualifying or race 1. He's a good few grid slots down on the rest of the pack. So a bit of a penalty for him, but as we've seen in the past, I'm not sure if that's going to stop him for all that long or anything. Keeps him out with the carnage of the race start. Just 5 seconds to go. And we do have 6 red lights on the gantry. The revs are rising, and we are away for race 2 here at Croft. Now it's going to be Andrew Brammer, who just about gets a slightly better launch in comparison to Paul Millman. There has the inside line as well. It's a strong start for him as we try to go 4 wide into that first corner. Alan Matthews, very hopeful late move, braking then. It caused a bit of a concertina effect behind him, I think, as Guy Swarbrick, Will Inglis and Matt Daly all involved in a bit of an incident there. Will Inglis really losing out, dropping down to P7. Guy Swarbrick drops as well to P6, unfortunately for him. And Matt Daly has found himself up in P5, of course, which, given how it started for him, I'm sure he's quite happy with. As we have a look now at, it's still Andrew Brammer in the lead of this race, under pressure though from Alan Matthews. Alan Matthews, our championship leader and our championship favourite, it must be said, is certainly going to up the ante and put the pressure on now for that driver in the blue and green liveried car. As we head through the middle sector now, it is 0.3 of a second separating the 2 runners, and only a few tenths separating the top 4, in fact. Very close running it indeed. Matt Daly getting to grips with the circuit, of course, on lap 1 of race 2, so he's having to do this with a full load of fuel as well. I hope for his sake he has done what he didn't quite remember to do in the Las Vegas fun race on Sunday, and has remembered to put a little bit more fuel in the car in comparison to his quali runs. But it is Matt Daly currently in P5, has a bit of clean air behind him, a bit of clean air in front of him as well. Let's see what he can do at this stage. But we want to have a look at what Barry Clayton and Paul Millman are doing. These two are very close on track indeed. Barry Clayton has the inside line and has a little bit of a pace advantage down the straight, and can go later onto the brakes, you would think, and is able to do so. Has gone a little bit wide on the exit though. Could that compromise him through the second part of this corner complex? I think it very well could do if he is not careful, but it looks to be he has the upper hand, has been able to keep Paul Millman at bay, and we wait for another potential overtaking opportunity for Barry Clayton, which I am sure is coming. In fact, here we are now. Paul Millman looks to see if he can get a move up the inside. In fact, he's going to take the curb a little bit too close indeed. Matt Daly does the same, actually, just behind him, and back end gets upset, and he has to back out of it just ever so slightly. Big puff of smoke on the lock-up there for a few drivers. I said, of course, the theme of the weekend, and so far it is certainly looking that way. Quickest car on track at the moment, though, is actually Will Inglis. Will Inglis with just a few tenths, a few seconds rather, to catch up to that mid-pack. He's been able to get ahead of Guy Swarbrick now and is hunting down likes of Matt Daly. Matt Daly could be a bit of a stopper for him as he tries to work his way back up towards the podium, though. Andrew Brammer has some decent pace underneath him at this stage, it must be said, he's just set a middle sector of a 42.3, which is, of course, purple at this stage, so a strong drive from him so far. He seems to be really spurred on with the threat of Alan Matthews and Barry Clayton behind. This is actually, I believe, one of the fastest laps we've seen from Andrew Brammer all weekend, and it's at the start of race 2. If he keeps this up later on into the race, he could be looking very strong indeed. Only 7 tenths separating him and Alan Matthews now. Meanwhile, it's all kicking off in the midfield between Matt Daly and Paul Millman as well. Paul Millman has certainly been no stranger to a bit of battling so far this weekend. He's certainly had his work out for him, as does Andrew Brammer, though. This time it's for the lead, of course, as we head down towards Barcroft. That that high-speed right-hand braking zone, of course, has caught a couple of drivers out so far. Hasn't done for these ones, though, as Barry Clayton gets a big lock-up, as does Paul Millman and Matt Daly as well. Matt Daly nailing the corner complex there. Sees a very slight gap open up for him on the exit of the Sunny Inn, or rather, I believe that's called Sunny Out, actually, is the exit of Sunny Inn, which is very logical. I like it. And is able to jump up into P4 then. Andrew Brammer being a bit of a roadblock at the moment for Alan Matthews, who's going to get the cleaner run, though, onto that start-finish straight. It must be said that Alan Matthews looks particularly close this time round. Might have the inside line because Andrew Brammer seems to be going shockingly wide. Opting not to go for the defence there and closing up on Alan Matthews. Now, can you argue that that was Alan Matthews' corner? I'm not sure you can, to be honest. It was very close, but not quite even half a car length really alongside Andrew Brammer, and unfortunately for those two, that battle for the lead is now going to be a battle for, well, P3 for Alan Matthews, a battle to try and keep P3 from Paul Millman, and a battle for P6 for Andrew Brammer. He's really lost a few positions there. This is what happens, even though we don't have many cars on track, they're all very close together, and one small error, which can certainly happen quite easily at a track like Croft, with all of its nuances and its tight corners and its very inconvenient tyre barriers, will soon see you drop all the way down the order. What has this meant then? It's now Barry Clayton who leads this race. He's had great pace at varying stages of this weekend. He just hasn't been able to really capitalise upon it, and now it seems to be his chance. Unfortunately for him, he's got a Matt Daly behind. Matt Daly, who's only 3 laps into his weekend, of course, is now 1.2 seconds behind the lead of this race, starting, of course, all the way back down on the other end of the grid, really. I don't want to sound like a Matt Daly fanboy, but he just keeps putting in these really strong performances. And if you get annoyed by me constantly, going on about how strong Matt Daly is, as you all well know, just take solace in the fact that last time I said Matt Daly was doing really strong and really well, Brazil happened. So, commentator's curse still very much at play here. In terms of fastest lap out of any drivers, that actually goes to Alan Matthews at this stage, to 24.5. But at this very moment in time, we're in the low 25s, and that goes to Matt Daly, with Will Inglis very closely matching him. But Will Inglis, as you can see there, has Paul Millman for company at this point in time. Matt Daly then 1.2 seconds from the lead of this race. Alan Matthews just a few tenths behind that as well, as we head through the Tower Bend. Once again, a big lock-up for Alan Matthews as Will Inglis goes up the inside. There's actually a very slight bit of contact from them, but it wouldn't be touring car racing if there wasn't a bit of a trading of paint. Will Inglis, actually, in all of this, has no front wing to speak of, really. He's doing an almighty job, as Andrew Brammer was in race 1, of going with a not so healthy car, shall we say. 3 tenths separating Alan Matthews and Matt Daly. Still, Matt Daly is managing to keep Alan Matthews behind while also dragging him towards Barry Clayton. Alan Matthews has a look at a very opportunistic move up the inside, heading in or rather midway through Complex, and has to back out of it in the end. Is now taking a very opportunistic look at the inside of the hairpin as well. It is really desperate. You get the sense looking at him is very desperate indeed to get past Matt Daly here if he wants any hopes of trying to fight for the lead of this race. At this stage, I'll be saying, come on, let's work together. Let's try and close in, take a bit of an endurance racing mentality towards this. I can tell you that Alan Matthews and Matt Daly are actually in the same, I'm not going to call it voice chat, they're in the same, they're on the same pit wall, shall we say. They're on the same pit wall. Barry Clayton's had a big off there. That is a great shame, and I wish I could hear what he's saying in the pit wall right now, because I can't imagine it is words of serenity, shall we say. I imagine he's not quite the happiest driver out there at this point in time. He's dropped all the way down to P7 as well from the lead of this race. Then that lead now goes to Matt Daly, and if he wasn't desperate before to get past Matt Daly, he is now, and can he do so? Matt Daly goes wide off the track, but is able to get back on the track just in the nick of time there, under braking, a big lock up there. Alan Matthews looking a little bit more composed at this stage, but is still somehow behind Matt Daly. I really thought he was going to have the move there and going to have the lead of this race. These two, though, are going to continue fighting on for another lap more. A big lock-up from Gijs Robrick there, as we see Matt Daly defending with all his might now as we head into the final couple of corners on this lap once again. And it's going to be the outside this time for Alan Matthews, or will it be? It will be. There's actually contact between those two drivers there. Matt Daly has no front wing. Alan Matthews has a little bit more front wing, but not too much at all as we get back onto that start-finish straight once again. And it's 3/10 now between Alan Matthews and Matt Daly. I get the feeling, though, this is not the end of this battle for the lead of this race. There is Alan Matthews having a bit of a look-up, well defended, though, by Matt Daly as we head now into the end of the second corner. On to the throttle once again. And what can Alan Matthews do from here now? What's his next opportunity? Well, it will be the Tower Hill Bend. After that, you've got Croft, and then you've got the final couple of corners. These are your prime overtaking spots on this track. Really going to have a look around the outside. We haven't seen that work too often. For Paul Millman it worked, and it's going to work again for Alan Matthews, copying that move there. A fantastic move as well, clearly very effective indeed, and it's now Alan Matthews who leads this race. I get the feeling, though, Matt Daly is not too happy with that one. He's going to try and fight for it back now as we head into the final part of this lap. While in the midst of battle, I should say, Alan Matthews sets a purple sector. It's not too often we see the fastest laps of the race being set in the midst of battle, but that is what we've seen here as he continues on later into this lap. Predicted a 24 flat. I suspect that is partly because you know, these two are very quick indeed, and you know, even when they're battling, they're going to be setting some decent times. But also because we're at that phase in the race now where yes, the tyres aren't at their absolute healthiest, but they haven't begun to completely drop off yet, and more importantly, the fuel load has got lighter as well. We're also in a bit more of a rhythm, so we could start seeing some impressive times here. I suspect from the likes of Matt Daly, Alan Matthews and Will Inglis. Will Inglis could be a bit of a dark horse in this race. If these two do at any point decide to slow each other down with their battle, then that will be the case. Although by the looks of things, that isn't happening. Alan Matthews won the 24.1, a very fast lap indeed at this stage in the race. In the middle of battling as well, that is very impressive. And this is, perhaps more importantly, really a strong showing for his championship charge. Of course, we wondered whether it was going to be plain sailing for him with Matt Daly not being here in race 1. Matt Daly did turn up to try and bring a fight to Alan Matthews, but Alan Matthews says your efforts were in vain, really, because Alan Matthews does end up leading this race anyway. That gap now separated, these two drivers now separated by a second rather. And we might see Alan Matthews settle into this a little bit more now. Not quite sure just yet. You never know what could happen. We're still less than half race distance, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll have a quick look at how the championship is shaping up after race 1. It's Alan Matthews with 202 points to his name. Will Inglis overtakes Matt Daly actually with 173 points to his name. 4 points separating Will Inglis and Matt Daly. As it stands, of course, it'll be Matt Daly taking back P2. Barry Clayton, meanwhile, in P4 with 115 points to his name now. Andrew Rammer, achingly close to Jack Hodgson with 90 points. So he will overtake Jack Hodgson to take P5 in the standings. And then we have Paul Millman jumps up to P7, overtaking Rosie Oliver. And then we have Guy Schwarbrick jumping up all the way to P10 and will be jumping up to P9 after this race as well. Elsewhere in the field, we have Steve Knight with Rob Whitney. No change for positions there. It's Guy Schwarbrick really who wins out after race 1 here. And it must be said, in terms of winning out, Alan Matthews seems to be doing a very nice job indeed now. 3 seconds separating Alan Matthews and Matt Daly, and still in the low 24s. Matt Daly, I think, might have pushed the car a little bit too hard perhaps at this phase in the race and just hasn't quite got it in him to challenge Alan Matthews that little bit more. You never know. 12 minutes, over 12 minutes to go, in fact, in this race. Anything can happen yet. As we see Will Inglis running comfortably in P3, in fact, getting a little bit closer to Matt Daly, it must be said. And you get the feeling that maybe there could be a battle brewing there. Not to be forgotten about, of course, Andrew Brammer as well isn't too far off this either. I think Barry Clayton has just overtaken Guy Schwarbrick there. Guy Schwarbrick after that early race incident, unfortunately, not really much you can do in this race, really, after a disappointing start for him. And we are heading down to the Tower Bend once again. A second separating Barry Clayton and Guy Swarbrick now. This could be, again, as we were talking about in race 1, it could be a good reference for Guy here, who does set a personal best at Sector 1. In fact, a lot of drivers are beginning to set some pretty competitive times on this lap, so this might be the quickest we see the cars get here in race 2. Elsewhere in the field, Andrew Brammer running in P4, keeping up with Will Inglis. Will Inglis, meanwhile, hunting down Matt Daly. So this is going to be the next battle that we see. It's going to be between, well, not quite sure actually. It's either going to be between Will Inglis and Matt Daly, or it could also be between Barry Clayton and Paul Millman. If we have a look at their pace at the moment, best lap for Barry Clayton, it is a 24.9 in comparison to Paul Millman's 26.6. The last laps were a 27.3 for Paul Millman and then a 26 flat for Barry Clayton. Make that a 25.4 on that last lap actually for Barry Clayton. So Barry is hunting down Paul Millman. Meanwhile, this battle for P2, which is potentially on the cards here, it's a 25.3 on that last lap for Will Inglis. Meanwhile, Matt Daly in the 26s. Meanwhile, best lap 24.7 for Will Inglis, 24.8 for Matt Daly. So Will Inglis is looking like the favourite to bring that fight towards Matt Daly for P2, as Barry Clayton is looking like he's going to bring that fight towards Paul Millman for P5. All of this is happening. Alan Matthews is leading this race now by 5.5 seconds. That is looking quite comfortable indeed. And there's 2 seconds between Will Inglis and Andrew Brammer here as well. Andrew Brammer, as we've discussed plenty of times now this season, always seems to find himself just quite comfortably in the midfield. Some great racecraft. Always seems to, if he does have an issue, which we have seen this weekend, is usually able to recover and still potentially take away some decent points. And the battle between Paul Millman and Barry Clayton is now underway as we get back towards the middle sector. In fact, we're in the middle sector, of course. No, we're not. We are now in the middle sector between Paul Millman and Barry Clayton. Paul Millman actually strong on the defence here. A bit of a favourite corner of his is the Tower Bend right-hander there. He seems to be good at taking the positions back here, although Barry Clayton did do much the same in race 1 as well. These two, I suspect, will be in for quite an interesting battle here as we head now towards Barcroft. In terms of their pace at the moment, it is Barry Clayton who has the upper hand on that last lap. Paul Millman in the high 27s, not sure what happened there. That is a bit of an outlier, but Barry Clayton has demonstrated a slightly higher pace overall here in race 2 so far. As we get into that final sector now, Andrew Brammer and Will Inglis. It seems like the battle that I suspected could be going on between Matt Daly and Will Inglis might not come to fruition. Instead, that battle will be between Andrew Brammer and Will Inglis, which will be very interesting indeed to see. So let's see what happens there. I can tell you though that the battle between Paul Millman and Barry Clayton continues on as we head down towards turn 1. Paul Millman has the inside line there. Who is going to go later on the brakes? Trying to go around the outside would be very brave indeed, and we haven't seen that here. We've seen plenty of impacts at that point on the track. Luckily, not the case here on the final few minutes of this lap. We're on the 12th lap of the race, and now Barry Clayton does get in front of Paul Millman as we head into, or rather, as we head on the exit of the chicane. And we now have Barry Clayton up into P5 here. Guy Swarbrick actually is keeping up with this pack here. Hasn't had to worry about battling, defending, or anything like that. So he's just been able to start setting some nice, consistent lap times, and he has been rewarded for that. We could see a battle brewing here with Guy Swarbrick in the mix as well. Meanwhile, at the front end of the field, I said that battle between Matt Daly and Will Inglis might not happen. I was completely wrong. I'm pleased to report it will happen as we go on board with Matt, or it might happen at least, as we go on board with Matt Daly and Will Inglis going around the left-hander onto that start-finish straight once again. Bouncing over the curbs there. Willingless does lock up ever so slightly. We've seen that a few times, actually. It hasn't really gone so wrong for anyone yet, which I'm pleased about. So clearly, it looks dramatic from outside the car, but maybe it's a little bit more controllable inside the car. Meanwhile, Guy Swarbrick is going for this overtake on Paul Millman here. I don't know who to look at. There's so many close battles happening all of a sudden in the final 5 minutes of this race. It's Paul Millman in P6, Guy Swarbrick in P7. Don't be tricked. I don't think that's a flash of the headlights. I think that's just the headlights rendering in as we switch them on camera. So it's we're not quite getting the make way sign yet in this race. Though we have seen that in the past, which is always a bit of fun. I always forget to map that button on my steering wheel. I need to remember that more. I nearly said controller then, but I'm not Alex Smith. I use the steering wheel like a sane man. Although I say that, he's still very quick. It certainly works for him as we go on board with Matt Daly here. Matt Daly just 4 tenths, make that 6 tenths separating Matt Daly and the Willingless as we head around the final corner once more. And onto that start-finish straight now. Actually losing out a little bit on the exit of that final corner. It's allowed Matt Daly to romp away somewhat down into the first corner, and instead Willingless now under pressure from Andrew Brammer. Make that, in fact, not too much pressure at all. And Willingless, by the looks of things, has a decent amount of pace underneath it, and that is a good catch from Matt Daly on the exit of the first corner. There just took a little bit too much curb, that upset the rear end, and he did have to put a bit of opposite lock in there in order to keep it on the grey stuff. He does continue on, but with a much closer margin to Willingless than perhaps he would prefer now as we head into the Tower Bend once again. I've probably called it Tower Hill Bend, which is some weird amalgamation of a Brands Hatch corner and the corner at Croft here. So apologies if that's the case. As we head down into that middle sector once more, Willingless very much occupying the entire review mirror. Matt Daly in the final 5 minutes of this race now. Currently lapping in the 25s, so decent pace underneath these cars still. A few cars in the 27s, which is exactly what we saw in race 1 actually. Overall, most cars in 25s, some in the 27s. So tyre work consistent between both sessions, which perhaps to be expected, although we do have a very slightly, well, shall we say, a slightly different natured start to the races with the reverse grid format. Especially when we were trying to go 4 wide into the first corner on lap 1, which at a track as wide as Croft is not really going to end well all that often. These two are the closest cars on the track at this point in time, and this is the battle that has been brewing for a long time now after Alan Matthews demonstrated that he had the measure on Matt Daly. Matt Daly has been lapping in the high 25s and just unfortunately hasn't been able to, fortunately for his sake, hasn't been able to close up that gap towards Alan Matthews and has slowly been falling into the jaws of Willingless. And now we see this battle brewing up, but our question is, at the rate of, given their pace delta isn't that much, 3 minutes ago, will that be enough for Willingless to get an attempted move in? I suspect he will go for it at some point. Always got, you're not a racing driver, you don't go for a gap, as a rather famous man once said, in a slightly more eloquent manner. But we head now into that final sector once more. 8.5 seconds between Alan Matthews and Matt Daly, but that is not the margin that Matt Daly is concerned about at this point in time. There's only 4 tenths separating him and the car in P3. It will still be a podium either way, just about, but he of course wants that second position to help him as much as possible in the championship. And there is the threat, of course, with this battling. It has slowed these two cars down, and what that has done is has brought Andrew Brammer right into the mix as well. So you never know. A small error or, an overtake for P2 for Willingless there could soon mean P4 for Matt Daly and off the podium, which would be the first time in quite a long time we've seen Matt Daly not end up on the podium. That's only a hypothetical, of course. At the moment, he's just about keeping Willingless at bay. But when the pack is this close in the mid-pack here, I'm calling it the mid-pack, one small error can cost you big time, but I'm sure Matt Daly wants to come away with that podium. In terms of their pace at the moment, the quickest car out on track is Andrew Brammer, that car behind these two. So these two, I suspect, would be the quickest, but they are really slowing each other down with all of this battling. Meanwhile, out in front, Alan Matthews has realised there's not much more that he really needs to do at this stage. With just a few minutes to go, he's got a 9-second lead. He can afford to maybe go 10-10, or maybe 9-10ths, not 10-10ths, and just bring that car home in a more put-together manner, shall we say, than perhaps we've seen in the past. You know, often the bodywork crew here at the AROC Racing Leagues have worked very hard indeed to keep the cars going in between sessions, and it's been relatively clean compared to what we've seen at maybe some stages haven't been the cleanest, but you know, there've been some weekends this season where the cars have you're quite surprised that they're still operational, but this has been a little bit of a nicer weekend for that. The drivers, I think, really getting a decent grasp of this car now. As the timer hits 0, there's still half a second between Matt Daly and Will Inglis. And we have not long to go in this race at all. Now, just a couple of laps left, just a few thousand metres to go. And the gap is still very close indeed. Matt Daly has been defending with all his might. It's been a strong defensive drive from Matt here. And he doesn't have too long to survive, though. Will Inglis potentially getting a little bit desperate there. They're trying to hang it around the outside, just about keep on the tarmac. But I think that could compromise him now for the next part of the race here. The 2 long straights. And if he's not careful as we now start the final lap of this race, he will find himself under threat from Andrew Brammer, the fastest car on track, of course. Or at least he was to that previous lap, where Alan Matthews took that crown rather comfortably at 25.3 on that previous lap now. Building that gap to nearly 10 seconds. This will be a battle that was certainly threatened, but just never quite came to be, unfortunately. I'm sure Matt Daly is somewhat relieved, and certainly feels like it was a battle at least, but I'm sure a little bit of, maybe not frustration, but just disappointment from Will Inglis and Andrew Brammer as well. What could have been for them in this race. I'm sure Will Inglis still quite happy with a podium, given how the race started as well, of course. Likewise for Andrew Brammer, given how the weekend started. I'm sure he'll be quite happy to pick up some decent points with that very odd end to race 1. I wasn't quite able to work out what happened in the end, but dropping back right down the start-finish straight, it looked like fuel, but he was able to get himself underway once again, and ended up coming last for his efforts as well, which was a shame. Maybe it was tactics to try and get the lead of this race, the start of the reverse grid race. Either way, we're going to go on board with Alan Matthews, who's heading around the final corner now. He put up an almighty defence against Matt Daly, and he was rewarded for it, really. Strong drive all weekend. He's had great pace, and he comes home to take the race to victory. Congratulations, Alan Matthews, for a very impressive drive indeed. And it will be Matt Daly in the end, who comes home P2. Will Inglis rounding out the podium in P3, and Andrew Brammer in tow as well, P4. A three-way battle that could have been, but still some strong driving. Great defence from Matt Daly. Excellent opportunistic kind of sportsmanship from Andrew Brammer to close up to those, and Will Inglis for putting on a strong attack. It was just, unfortunately, Croft, maybe not the easiest circuit to get the overtakes done on, so he comes home with a P3 in the end. And then we have Barry Clayton coming home in P5 in the end. I'm sure he would have wanted higher from this race. Paul Milman P6 and Guy Strawbrick very close behind indeed, P7. In fact, all three of these drivers, just like we had between P2 and P4, very close together indeed. Now, my question is, do we have any victory celebrations? We have some rallycross from Will Inglis there, who finds a quick way back into the pits, and I'm sure he will argue with the stewards that the actual race finish line was in the middle of the pits there, so he believes he comes home first. And then we have Alan Matthews, who is just bringing the car in nicely, and in fact everyone seems to be bringing the car in nicely here. No one seems to be abusing the cars or the track. Oh no, I spoke far too soon. Thank you, Andrew, for that nice, gradual, shall we call it, descent away from the camera field of view there. I can say it was actually only a 25-mile-an-hour impact with the wall there, so a relatively comfortable accent to have, as we have Alan Matthews, our race to victor here, bringing it home nicely. Paul Millman heading past Andrew Rana now. I wonder if he's I thought for a second he might try and just take him out for some reason. He didn't, but I thought he could have. There is Barry Clayton just planted in a barrier there, and Matt Daly handbrake turns his way through the first corner. I'm sure everyone who had an Alfa Romeo hatchback, especially if it was like your first when you were a teenager or something, has certainly tried to test out if the handbrake works the way that Matt Daly and Alan Matthews are currently doing so. So, welcome to the third part of this weekend, the Formula Drift Championships in the Giulietta WTCR. A strong start for Matt Daly there. Alan Matthews bringing up a good fight here, is actually able to keep it pointing the right direction, and they have decided to play snooker instead with some Giuliettas. That is very expensive indeed, and this track isn't quite as smooth as a snooker table. That was 65 miles an hour there, and that brings an end to the front wing and brings an end to this stream as well. I hope you've enjoyed watching as much as I've enjoyed commentating. We'll catch you in a fortnight's time for the final round of the touring car action, and next week at Las Vegas as well. So from me, it's a goodbye.